By the 20th century, the Jews of Corfu had 4 synagogues: 2 Greek synagogues, 1 Apulian Spanish minyan, and 1 Apulian minyan. Local Judeo-Italian was neither regulated nor uniform. Judeo-Italian of Corfu is a result of late 15th century Jewish migration after expulsions from Sicily and Apulia, as well as an Italian dialect under Venetian rule until as late as the 18th century. Like Judeo-Greek and Judeo-Spanish, the language was written in Hebrew with Italian phonetics and grammatical features. The other congregations of Corfu included a Greek community, which had a Greek Romaniot Judeo-Greek speaking tradition, and a Romaniot prayer rite from Byzantium called Minhag Corfu. This is relevant since the majority of the Jews in Corfu were Italian. The latter imposed their language on most of the Jews of the island, most of whom spoke the Apulian dialect interlaced with Greek words. Okay, Corfu was Venetian from 1386 to 1799. A Venetian dialect made inroads on the Jews since then in the midst of 5 centuries. After the 1891 blood libel in Corfu, a third of the Jewish community migrated to Trieste and Alexandria, Egypt. In Trieste, until the Holocaust, the Jews of Corfu had a separate community and a separate synagogue. Most went to the gas chambers of Auschwitz, speaking a Corfiot Judeo-Italian dialect. The term Judeo-Italian is academic and relatively new. In English, Judeo-Italian was used by the philologist Lazaros Balelli in 1904 for his article Judeo-Greek and Judeo-Italian in the Jewish Encyclopedia, describing the languages of the Jews of Corfu. This is a view of the ghetto. They have narrow streets. Some features of Corfiot Judeo-Italian versus other Judeo-Italian dialects. In the second person plural, application of the central southern form eti to the conjugations of the imperative and the future. So in Corfu, the ending was ati, eti, and iti. The following strong declinations in the third person singular indicative in the 14th century Judeo-Italian, like fau, vau, fau, and sao, but they aren't seen in Corfiot text. So they spoke that way, which is Apulian, but you don't see it written. But we know from past interviews of speakers. Application of the following assimilated consonant clusters: ND becomes NN, and MB becomes MM. Actually, I don't want to get too technical, but that ND is a similar influence like from Portuguese, or the Portuguese that the Jewish Portuguese Marranos spoke. Typically of the entire central southern area of Italy. So you have conservation of clusters, and in Corfiot terms it comes out Ociu or Piu. And so there's a researcher, Seth Jerkover, who wrote about Judeo-Italian, and at least 2 Judeo-Italian varieties based on Salento and Venetian varieties. You see the similarities in Corfu. When Venice ruled Corfu and the Ionian Islands, including where there were Jewish communities in Zakynthos and Kefalonia, until the late 18th century, most of the Corfiot upper classes spoke Italian, or Venetian in many cases. So also in Corfu and the islands, a lot of these people are not Greek Orthodox, they're Catholic. But the mass of people remain Greek ethnically, linguistically, and religiously before and after the Ottoman sieges of the 16th century. So Corfiot Italians were mainly concentrated in the city of Corfu, which was called Città di Corfu by the Venetians. So more than half of the population of Corfu was Venetian speaking. So this influenced how the Jews spoke their Jewish language. No. But there's also variations. The Venetian of the Corfu Jews accordingly differed from the same Venetian dialect as spoken by non-Jews in the same town. The O of the plural of nouns ending in a formation which originated in the Hebrew ending, simplified, according to the Italian laws of phonology, became an O with an accent. So the Italianized plural of baracha in Corfu Italian becomes baracho instead of brachot, which are blessings. And then it becomes novita becomes novito, or chita for city becomes chito. So there has presumably been no Jewish literature in this dialect, since Venice herself very early adopted pure Italian as her official language, and all documents of the Corfu Jewish community were written in that language, which served as well in Hebrew schools as the means of translating the Bible. 2 Apulian love songs, seemingly original, exist in manuscript, of which one is an independent composition of a rather scurrilous purport, while in the second one each stanza is preceded by one of a religious Hebrew poem on a quite different subject. Both are written in Hebrew characters. Now, rabbis would have been free to write in Hebrew, or even if they wanted to write in a Judeo-Italian or Judeo-Apulian dialect, they could. We don't have examples of rabbis writing exegesis in this dialect. We have earlier examples of religious poetry, though. In a text in Apulian Judeo-Corfu dialect are instructions for how to operate or conduct the Passover Seder. Elegies in the Apulian language for the 9th of Av, the day that the Jews observed the destruction of the first and second temple, were preserved in the early 20th century. And it was still a custom then, even amongst the well-to-do classes who had given up their Spanish dialect, to explain the symbolic rites in Apulian, Kadesh or Chatz Karpas, on Passover Eve. The simple past tense, viti, vidisti, or viti, was the only one in use amongst the Apulian Jews, who agreed in this respect with the Apulians of the Italian coast. The future is expressed by means of the auxiliary anzu, I have, as on the continent, and a following infinitive, that means like for the verb, like to go, to do, which is always, as in modern Greek, resolved. Such resolution occurs quite frequently in the area of bari, with the particulars mu or mi, but not as regularly in Corfu, where the exception are like lu manzari, lu mibiviri. Now, Greek speakers don't know this. This is only local Italian Catholics or Jews, so that that would speak like this. So there are differences in how an Italian from Apulia in southern Italian spoke, and then how someone in Corfu, who was an Italian speaker, as a Gentile or a Jew, would speak. So this dialect has brought all borrowed words under its own laws of accidence, but its original vocabulary has been hopelessly impoverished and deprived of its finest elements. So, in other words, because it wasn't such a written language, they didn't have, the vocabulary didn't develop for all the means of life. And like today, when you have technology, you have to have new words for everything. So in languages where people spoke simply, but they didn't have a written language like newspapers, in that language, the language isn't going to develop. Or Judeo-Spanish with radio broadcasts has developed because you have to find words for all sorts of modern news situations. But in those days, the language was limited to just simple conversation. So you didn't have the actual vocabulary was very limited. So, a Corfiot Jew visiting any part of Apulia would have found difficulty in understanding the spoken vernacular or the songs of the natives, although the grammatical structure is exactly the same as that of his own dialect, except with the exception of a lot of the endings. So a lot of the endings were made up in Corfu throughout the centuries, or they're different because the Hebrew ending was different. And then when people spoke this Italian Jewish dialect, they also made other variations which are different than how Catholic Italians would have spoken in the same island of Corfu or the Ionian Islands or in southern Italy.